Today I want to cover the latest news in IT, hardware mainly, and a little bit of software, but mainly hardware. Welcome to the gig. I'm Johnny O, and I don't have a teleprompter. I have a piece of paper, so should be good. So the biggest thing that I've noticed recently is a trend that I predicted, I think, in a previous show about 6 weeks ago, and that was the drop in price for SSDs. Now, they're dropping drastically right now, and I'll tell you why. For the third time in the past 10 years, DRAM makers, which are RAM makers, and the RAM makers also make the chips for the SSDs, have been charged again with price fixing. That's why in the last 2 years, the SSDs have gone up in price and RAM has gone up in price because they're fixing the price again. I think the last time in 2014, LG had to pay $600 million in fines, and they weren't the only ones. So they're running around doing their price fixing garbage, and they got caught again for the third time, by the way. So maybe they're making so much money when they fix prices that it's quite possible that these fines don't work. So we'll see how it goes. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll update you. But SSDs have dropped drastically in prices in the past few months. And this week was the lowest price drop I've seen so far. You can get a Samsung M2. That's the M2 drive that your system would boot off of, and it runs on the PCIe bus. I explained before on the show with the buses and everything. It's the really fast one. It looks like a stick of gum. You can get a half a terabyte Samsung M2 drive for $170. That's insanely cheap. Insanely cheap. I think at the height of the spinners, the hard drives, the HDDs, I think a really good hard drive would be around that same price range, a Barracuda or something back in the day. You know, even 10 years ago, we were using Barracudas, like really fast spinners, really good spinners with a really big cache to boot Windows. Now they use M2s over the PCIe bus, and that's about what we would pay for a good Barracuda. About the same size. I think they would be slightly more, like as far as capacity. But that's the same price range, so we're really seeing a difference. You can also get a Samsung 1 terabyte SSD that runs over your SATA bus for $200. And it burns my ass, and I'll tell you why. I just spent $150 on half a terabyte drive no more than 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, actually. And then we saw this big price drop. So that's totally irritating. The next big news in tech would be Facebook stock. Now, I keep hearing that it dropped 17%, then 25%, and I've heard 26%. I read 25% from several sources. So regardless of the percentage of the Facebook stock drop, they lost $118 billion in value. Now, this is a weird situation because what was happening is, and it gets weird, the CIA was actually paying Facebook for data and also to manipulate data. So data manipulation services and user data, they were paying them for that, and they had this big CIA contract. So apparently the CIA canceled their contract. Now, I'm not discussing why the CIA would use Facebook or anything. I just want to look at the numbers of what happened. So as soon as they pulled out, they had to post their quarterly earnings, and they weren't as good as expected, right? Because they don't have that contract, that government contract with the CIA, right? So they don't have that government contract, so they post their earnings without that contract, and then there was a big sell-off at the top, big sell-off. And that's how it works. When there's a big sell-off, the stock price drops. Now, with this service, the Facebook service, and other things like YouTube and even traditional media like CNN, what people don't realize is exactly how much money the government puts into these companies. when they go public. They put a lot of money into them. CNN has been cut off from government advertisements. So what happened was the government would run a story as a commercial on CNN, for example. I don't know what story, I'm not going to get into specifics. They would make up a story, and CNN would package it as news and make it look like some expose or editorial or something like this. So it essentially would look like news because it's CNN. It's not. It's a paid-for commercial, 30-minute or 1-hour commercial by the federal government. And this was going on for years. They've lost all that revenue because the new administration doesn't do that with them anymore, doesn't pay them for these fake stories, basically. So that's essentially what they were also doing with Facebook. So they cut off that money, so they don't have that stream of income, so the stock dropped. And essentially what Facebook is, really, it's a web page. Let's be serious. It's a web page with a lot of users, like a lot of user data. So they need really big IDCs to sustain it. So they can take that data and they can manipulate it a certain way and manipulate it that way and sell the data, sell the manipulated data, whatever they want. So they have a lot of data that companies and governments are interested in, so they leverage that. Now, that's because they're a private company. If they were a public service, like there's been some talk about making these guys public service, because then the First Amendment would prevent them from, say, what are they doing? What was the big thing? I read it just this morning. Yeah, so they were censoring like conservative political groups and this sort of thing. So they're censoring, well, according to the First Amendment, if they were a public service, they're not allowed to do that. Same with YouTube and Twitter and all these guys. And I believe there's several lawsuits against Twitter right now for that same reason. They're claiming First Amendment. Someone at some point will claim First Amendment to Facebook, but Facebook did it very nefariously, and they would actually have to get court orders to look at their system, the back end of their system, to see exactly what they did. So that's the situation. Also, Intel stock has dropped 6%, which isn't surprising because AMD's Ryzen chips are selling like crazy. And so they're taking a bit of that market share away from Intel, even though Intel is also reporting pretty good sales, really good sales. AMD is also reporting good sales, the best sales in 7 years, actually. But because the market's only this big, and then AMD sales go up, it takes away from Intel. Say Intel has this much of the market, AMD sales go up, Intel's market share declines. And that's the reason for the 6% drop. People say, oh, it's because they don't have a CEO right now. So apparently the CEO got ousted simply because he had an affair with someone else at Intel or something like this, and it got out, so he resigned. I'm not getting into that. That has nothing to do with tech. But you can see as Intel's sales are still pretty good, but AMD is eating into their market share. And another thing is those Ryzen chips are excellent chips, by the way, and they're just coming down in price. I think for their top model. And what was it? The 1950 Threadripper. I think it was down to $529 at one point. I mean, or was it 79? I don't know the exact numbers, but they drop the price, right? Whenever they want market share, they drop the price, which decreases their profit but increases their sales. And with these publicly traded companies, even making break-even sales is important because it maintains their stock price. Yeah? Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is predictions, but I'm going to do that in a separate segment. This has been The Gig. Don't forget to like and subscribe below.